I'm Theron Q. Ramacharaka. Now, already on my YouTube channel, I have posted several bits of work mentioning and a few describing the astral plane of the cosmos. And I've always presented it in a connection with, or I attempted to make connections with information that we're getting from individuals who are painstakingly researching and presenting material regarding the control hierarchy, the social control hierarchy of this planet, and their doings, their malicious doings behind the scenes, their motives, their plans, and their methods. I've been trying to make this connection, generally stated that as follows. The control hierarchy, we can, in general, most of this information that's being put out traces back the control or line of influence into the world back to several bloodline families who engage apparently in satanic rituals, black magic practices, and whatnot. And I've been presenting the idea that the control hierarchy, or the line, the sequence of influence, goes further than that. It reaches into the astral plane and various of its entities, and some of the forces that are involved in what may be called the plane of forces as well, not just the astral plane. And when it comes to the idea of a war on consciousness, I'm presenting the material to which I've just alluded, astral plane material and plane of forces material, as well as universal laws of cosmic operation. I've been referring to those as being important to know about if we are going to get a grip on the war on consciousness, what's being termed the war on consciousness, and what to do about it. I presented this material in the majority of the videos that I've posted here so far, and in trying to encourage you to make these connections and follow along with me whenever I allude to them, these connections, as well as try to piece it together for yourself as well as I'm going. So here now, I want to present more information about the astral plane, but not quite so much in the same way. I mean, more of a description of the astral plane, more in connection with oneself. But still, bear in mind, where possible, try to make these connections, because I'm trying to give here an increased or an expanded view of the astral plane, because I'm encouraging the viewers here on my channel to learn about it as much as possible in this manner. Just this method of investigation, just information, rather than by means of experimenting with astral projection, which has all kinds of pitfalls. If you really want to learn about it, take it from advanced occultists. Learn about it that way. And again, toward the goal of, well, there are various goals. Ultimately, the ultimate goal about learning about any of this is to not only learn about the world around us and, planes of reality that we both can see with our physical senses and those that we cannot, for its own sake, but all as in a manner, of course, in the direction of self-actualization, self-realization, or a movement in the direction of true selfhood. I mean, that's the ultimate purpose. And that, by the way, happens to be very important. That purpose that goal in itself happens to be very important in the war of consciousness. what to do about it. Happens to be very important. So all of this weaves together, all of this fits together, and I'm going to produce even further videos that give further descriptions of some basic principles about how to pursue action with respect to the war on consciousness, which again dovetails, blends right in with movement toward true selfhood, and also with what can be called mental alchemy or mentalism applied toward these ends. Now, what I'm going to give you here is by, again, an author that I've been referring to quite a lot, and I will, in future videos, get to certain other authors. But once again, I'm going to draw from material written by William Walker Atkinson under his pseudonym, his pen name, Yogi Ramacharaka. Now, the Ramacharaka part of which forms part of my username here on YouTube. Anyway, as I've pointed out elsewhere, especially at the beginning of the book that I have now fully posted, written by the same person but under another name, Swami Panchadasi, that when it comes to the astral plane or discussion of the planes of the cosmos, we come upon a not so important set of, well, there are differences in, how many planes there are said to be, and what their names are, and what they all include. I've already pointed that out elsewhere, but I'll point it out again because here, William Walker Atkinson gives yet another view on how many there are and what they all include. And I'm pointing this out because if you've seen the video series that I've posted here called The Arcane Teachings, written by William Walker Atkinson, he says in there that there are 3 great planes of manifestation. In the astral world, he's presenting the whole picture from a slightly different viewpoint, and he indicates that there are 7. Now here in this book, which is called A Correspondence Course in Yogi Philosophy and Oriental Occultism, he breaks it up again differently. And he leaves out the plane of forces. He says that the astral plane is the next great plane, adjacent to, for lack of a better word, to the physical plane. Well, in between there, in the astral world, he's referring to the plane of forces. It doesn't matter how we break all this stuff up. It's all just a matter of convenience for discussing it in the context in which it's being discussed at any given time and toward any given end. All are equally valid. I go with the seven planes. And because it's a greater breakdown of things, it's a little bit easier to analyze affairs that way. And because it has been generally accepted by occultists through time that each plane, no matter how many there are, has 7 major subdivisions, and each of those subdivisions has 7 subdivisions. Generally, it's agreed that that dividing goes to the 7th degree of division. So, if it's 7 subdivisions and so forth to the 7th degree of dividing, then it's just consistent to say that there are 7 planes in all, 7 general planes. So I usually stick with that, but the number isn't a big deal. And once again here, William Walker Atkinson, under the name Yogi Ramacharaka, goes about the classifying them or numbering them a little bit differently. That's not such a big deal here. And I'm going to skip a little bit, and I'm not going to give you the whole book. I'm going to just give some astral plane or astral world, as it's again called in this book, information that blends in toward the end with the idea of spiritual evolution or spiritual progress. I want to make a connection, but there are a lot of connections going on here in my work that I'm trying to present to you and for you And this is some of the best stuff I've ever encountered in writing regarding these specific topics. And it does make it rather easy for me to connect with the spirit, the control hierarchy in the world and some of their affairs, and then what we can do about it, how we can use some of this knowledge. All right, so anyway, I am off into what is called Lesson 10 in this correspondence course. And I'm going to skip a little bit of the introductory material and get right to the book right now. Before going into the subject of the several planes of the astral world, it'll be better for us to consider some of the general phenomena classified under the term astral. In our 6th lesson, we told you that man in the body, in addition to his physical senses of sight, hearing, tasting, smelling, and feeling, has 5 astral senses, being counterparts of the physical senses. Now here again is a slight difference. In the astral world, which I've already posted here, he adds that there are actually 2 additional physical senses that are undeveloped in most people, and 7 senses that are astral counterparts to those 7 physical ones. But he's not mentioning that right here. Okay, so these differences are very minor, and they're just for purposes of explanation at the moment. Okay, so this is not meant to be, it's not contradictory material. I want to make that clear. It's not contradictory, and it should not be a source of confusion. Realize, please, that these are just convenient ways to discuss what's intended to be discussed at the moment. Okay? In addition to his physical senses, he has 5 astral senses, operating on the astral plane, by which he may receive sense impressions without the aid of physical sense organs. He also possesses a 6th sense, physical organ, the organ of the telepathic sense. Now here he's mentioning a 6th one, but I don't, as far as I recall, he's not going to mention a 7th. And that 6th sense has a corresponding astral sense. Now, these astral senses function on the lower astral plane, the plane next removed from the physical. And the phenomena of clairvoyance is produced by the use of these astral senses, as we've described earlier. There are, of course, higher forms of clairvoyance, which operate on planes far above that used in ordinary clairvoyance. But such powers are so rare and are possessed only by those of high attainment that we scarcely need do more than mention them here. Now, on this lower astral plane, the clairvoyant sees, the clairaudient hears, and the psychometrist feels. On this plane, the astral body moves about, and ghosts manifest, so-called ghosts. Disembodied souls living on the higher planes of the astral world, in order to communicate with those on the physical plane, must descend to this lowest plane and clothe themselves with coarse astral matter in order to accomplish the object. On this plane moves the astral bodies of those in the flesh, who have acquired the art of projecting themselves in the astral. Now, I've talked about astral projection before. I've pointed out dangers of it. And I want to point out something else now. It's right here. It's right here. Anybody who astral projects, the average person who's into astral projection, okay, and thinks that they are learning all about the astral plane, is wrong. Wrong for so many reasons. This is just one of them. Listen to what it says. On this plane moves the astral bodies of those in the flesh who have acquired the art of projecting themselves in the astral. This lowest plane, subplane of the astral. That's all they're really getting. And there are many other things that make it so that it's just kind of foolish to do it. And then there are other things that make it kind of dangerous to do. Whether or not a person is immediately aware of those dangers, or even recognizes when they have been encountered. All right. It is possible for a person to project his astral body or travel in his astral body to any point within the limits of Earth's attraction. And the trained occultist may do so at will under proper conditions. Others may occasionally take such trips without knowing just how they've done it, and having afterwards the remembrance of a particular and very vivid dream. In fact, many of us do take such trips when the physical body is wrapped in sleep. And one often gains much information in this way upon subjects in which he's interested by holding astral communication with others interested in the same subject, all unconsciously, of course. The conscious acquirement of knowledge in this way is possible only to those who have progressed quite a way along the path of attainment. Now I'm saying the conscious acquirement of knowledge. That would mean information that's accurate. Much information attained by your average person dabbling with astral projection isn't accurate. They have no accurate idea of the sources of the information that they believe they are getting. It often comes into perception in a distorted manner and then isn't remembered properly. What we're referring to here is actual knowledge. It's possible only to those who have progressed quite a way along the path of attainment, not the path of skill in astral projection, a path of attainment. That's a different thing, too. The trained occultist merely places himself in the proper mental condition and then wishes himself at some particular place, and his astral travels there with the rapidity of light, or even more rapidly. The untrained occultist, of course, has no such degree of control over his astral body and is more or less clumsy in his management of it. The astral body is always connected with the physical during the life of the latter by a thin silk-like astral thread, which maintains the communication between the two. And were this cord to be severed, the physical body would die, as the connection of the soul with it would be then terminated. On this lower astral plane may also be perceived the auric colors of people, as described earlier here, and described elsewhere a little bit, or at least alluded to by me in other videos that I put out. Maybe at some point I'll put out some more detailed information about that, but there's just a lot of information about that kind of thing already available in bookstores, on the internet, and whatnot. Some of it's more accurate than others. But anyway, likewise, it is on this plane that the emanations of thought may be observed by the clairvoyant vision. And these will become important later on when I get more to thought forms, which have already been described in other videos here. The Arcane Teachings series, as well as the Astral World series that I've already put here. And I'm going to get more to that too in other videos. These will become important in the War on Consciousness, as a matter of fact. Very powerful thought forms charged with vital force. The vital force is a person who created them, and created with a strong mental visual effect at the same time, take on a life of their own, and they're then called an entity which has a life of its own, although it is an artificial entity being completely human created. But they can have considerable power and have a very long lifespan and do many things within parameters. They can have great influence over humanity, and also humanity can have great influence over them. The mind is continually throwing off emanations which extend some distance from the person for a time, and which then, if strong enough, gradually pass off, drawn here and there by the corresponding thoughts of others. These thought emanations resemble clouds, some delicate and beautiful, while others are dark and murky. To the psychic or the astral vision, places are seen to be filled with this thought stuff, varying in character and appearance with the quality and nature of the original thought which produced them. Some places are seen to be filled with bright, attractive thought stuff, showing that the general character of the thought of those who inhabit it is of an uplifting and cheerful character, while other places are filled with a hazy, murky mass or cloud of thought stuff, showing that those who live there, or some visitors, have been dwelling on the lower planes of thought, and have filled the place with depressing reminders of their sojourns through the place. Such rooms should be opened wide to the sun and the air, and one moving into them should endeavor to fill them with bright, cheerful, and happy thoughts, which will drive out the lower quality of thought stuff. A mental command such as, "I command you to move away from this place," will cause one to throw out strong thought vibrations, which will either dissolve the objectionable thought stuff or will cause it to be repelled and driven away from the immediate vicinity of the person making the command. Now, there are additional methods to employ, and when used all together, that command becomes much more powerful. That'll be a subject for a different video. If people could see, just for a few minutes, the thought atmosphere of groggeries, gambling rooms, and places like that, they wouldn't care to visit them. Not only is the atmosphere fairly saturated with degrading thoughts, but the lower class of disembodied souls flock in large numbers around these scenes, striving to break the narrow bonds which separate them from the physical plane in such places. Perhaps the best way to make plain to you the general aspects and phenomena of the astral world would be to describe to you an imaginary trip made by yourself in that world in charge of an experienced occultist. Now, this is the kind of thing that he did also in the astral world, a guided tour. This is going to be a guided tour, once again, but slightly different viewpoint, slightly different bits of information. So there will be some overlap. I'm trying to just give you more information along the same lines here. We'll send you in imagination on such a trip here in this lesson in charge of a competent guide. It being presupposed that you have made considerable spiritual progress in your life to this point. As otherwise, even the guide couldn't take you very far, except by adopting heroic and very unusual methods, which he probably would not see fit to do in your case. Are you ready? Well, here's your guide. Now, bear in mind, this is an imaginary trip. Nothing is actually going to happen here. In this video, it's not going to cause you to take an astral journey just by listening to it. We're just going along in our imaginations here. Perhaps the best way to make plain to you the general aspects and phenomena of the astral world would be to describe to you an imaginary trip. So you've gone into the silence and suddenly become aware of having passed out of your body and to now be occupying only your astral body. You stand beside your physical body and see it sleeping on the couch, but you realize that you're connected with it by a bright silvery thread, looking something like a large bit of bright, spider web. You're conscious of the presence of your guide who is to conduct you on your journey. He also has left his physical body and is in his astral form, which reminds you of a vapory something, the shape of the human body, but which can be seen through and which can move through solid objects at will. Your guide takes your hand and says, "Come on." And in an instant you've left your room and you're over the city in which you dwell, floating along as does a summer cloud. You begin to fear that you might fall, and as soon as the thought enters your mind, you find yourself sinking. But your guide places a hand under you and sustains you, saying, "Now just realize that you cannot sink unless you are afraid that you will. Hold the thought that you are buoyant, and you will be so." You do so, and you're delighted to find that you may float at will, moving here and there in accordance to your wish or desire. You see great volumes of thought clouds arising from the city, like great clouds of smoke, rolling along and settling here and there. You also see some finer vapory thought clouds in certain quarters, which seem to have the property of scattering the darker clouds when they come into contact with them. Here and there you see bright thin lines of bright light, like an electric spark traveling rapidly through space, which your guide tells you are telepathic messages passing from one person to another, the light being caused by the prana with which the thought is charged. You see, as you descend toward the ground, that every person is surrounded by an egg-shaped body of color, his aura. in which is reflected his thought and prevailing mental state, the character of the thought being represented by the varying colors. Some are surrounded by beautiful auras, while others have them around them a black, smoky aura in which are seen flashes of red light. Some of these auras make you heartsick to observe, as they give evidence to such base, gross, and animal thoughts that they cause you pain, as you have become more sensitive now that you are out of your physical body. But you don't have time to spare here, as your trip is but a short one, and your guide says, come on. Now, you don't seem to change your place in space, but a change seems to come over everything, like the lifting of a gauzy curtain in a pantomime. You no longer see the physical world with its astral phenomena, but seem to be in a new world, a land of queer shapes. You see astral shells floating about, discarded astral bodies of those who have shed them as they've passed on. These aren't pleasant to look at, and you hurry with your guide. But before you leave this second empty room to the real astral world, your guide bids you to just relax your mental dependence on your astral body, and much to your surprise, you find yourself slipping out of it, leaving it in the world of shells, but being still connected with it by a silk-like cord or thread, just as it in turn is connected with your physical body. Now, this is information, this right here, this last little part, was not in the Arcane Teachings or the Astral World book, which I've already posted here. This is a little bit of additional information. And this very aspect of it is going to become explained in greater detail in a later video that I am going to post. So if you're taking things in the sequence in which I posted them here, this is a progression of thought going on. Just as it in turn is connected with your physical body, which you have almost forgotten by this time, but to which you are still bound by these almost invisible ties. You pass on clothed in a new body, or rather an inner garment of ethereal matter, for it seems as if you have been merely shedding one cloak and then another. The you part of yourself remains unchanged. Now that is so cool. That is very important here in my overall program of war on consciousness and what to do about it, movement toward true selfhood, okay? There are various procedures, some very complicated, some going way back in history and developing through time or devolving through time as they've moved from, let's say, the Orient to the West. There have been many procedures, methods for accomplishing these goals here of self-actualization, whatever, movement toward true selfhood. And many various of these procedures give us methods that involve determining what we are not, what is not the true self, and only by the process of elimination then arriving at an understanding or an experience of the true self. But see, with what this just said about experiencing what you are not in the astral plane, from an astral plane point of view, if we can take this imaginary trip and see that the same things apply as in the process of elimination that we can put ourselves through in mind and through various experiential practices at the physical plane level of consciousness. The same principle here, this process of elimination, of realizing what we aren't. Now we're putting that same process, just imagine that same process happening here. If we were studying this material that's being presented right here, in these last words that I just read, if we were to be trying to figure out what we really are, the true self, by process of elimination from this point of view, this plane now, from awareness on this plane, the astral plane, it makes the task, it brings the point home even stronger. Okay, so let me read it again. The book wasn't written exactly to, it's a description of the astral plane. It wasn't to help us understand who we are, even though I know the writer. I know the writer has these motives behind what he's saying. But just listen to it again. Read into this as much as you possibly can. Okay? You pass on clothed in a new body, or rather an inner garment of ethereal matter, for it seems to you as if you have been merely shedding one cloak and then another. The you part of yourself remains unchanged. You smile now at the recollection that once upon a time you thought that the physical body was you. But now you're realizing that you have many bodies and none of them are the real you. The plane of the astral shells fades away, and you seem to have entered a great room of sleeping forms, lying at rest and in peace, the only moving shapes being those from higher spheres who have descended to this plane in order to perform tasks for the good of their humbler brethren. Occasionally some sleeper will show signs of awakening, and at once some of these helpers will cluster around him and seem to melt away into some other plane with him. But the most wonderful thing about this region seems to be that as the sleeper awakens slowly, his astral body slips away from him just as did yours a little before, and passes out of that plane to the place of shells, where it slowly disintegrates and is resolved into its original element. This discarded shell is not connected with the physical body of the sleeping soul, which physical body has been buried or cremated as it is dead, nor is the shell connected with the soul which has gone on, as it has finally discarded it and thrown it off. It's different in your case now, though, for you have merely left it in the anteroom and will return and resume its use presently. It hasn't been discarded. You've just left it behind. The scene again changes and you find yourself in the regions of the awakened souls, through which you, with your guides, wander backward and forward. You notice that as the awakening souls pass along, they seem to rapidly drop sheath after sheath of their mental bodies. For so these higher forms of ethereal coverings are called. And you notice that as you move toward the higher planes, your substance becomes more and more etherealized. And that as you return to the lower planes, it becomes coarser and grosser, although always far more etherealized than even the astral body. Now, what he's talking about here, he's talking about, when he's talking about these mental bodies, he's referring to what he would elsewhere have been calling the mental plane, which is not the astral plane. But here he's including all of this discourse under the general umbrella of the astral plane. So once again, like I said, there are there's different ways of numbering the planes and different ways of naming them. But still, it's the material, the content, the dynamics, the principles at work that are the important part. Not so much how they're classified and broken up, unless, of course, as I pointed out elsewhere, unless, of course, your main focus of conversation or discourse is how they are broken up. Well, then that becomes the focus of your discourse. That was kind of silly to say. That's a little repetitive. But that's when such details or technicalities would become more important. If that's your focus, then that's what's important. That's not the focus here. You notice that as you move toward the higher planes, your substance becomes more and more etherealized, and as you return to the lower planes, it becomes coarser and grosser, although always more etherealized than even the astral body, and infinitely finer than the material physical body. You also notice that each awakening soul is left to finally awaken on some particular plane. Your guide tells you that the particular plane is determined by the spiritual progress and attainment made by the soul in its past lives, for it has had many earthly visits or lives, and that it is practically impossible for a soul to go beyond the plane to which it belongs. Although those on the upper planes may freely revisit the lower ones, this being the rule of the astral world, not an arbitrary law, but a law of nature. Elsewhere in a future video sometime, that's going to be discussed in greater detail, just exactly how that works. If the student will pardon the commonplace comparison, he may get an understanding of it by imagining a large screen or a series of screens, such as used for sorting coal into sizes. The large coal is caught by the first screen, the next size by the second, and so on until tiny coal is reached. Now the large coal cannot get into the receptacle of the smaller sizes, but the small sizes may easily pass through the screen and join the large sizes, if force be imparted to them. Now just so in the astral world, the soul with the greatest amount of materiality and coarser nature is stopped by the screen of a certain plane and cannot pass on to higher ones, while one that has passed on to higher planes, having cast off more confining sheaths, can easily pass backward and forward among the lower planes. In fact, souls often do so, for the purpose of visiting friends on the lower planes and giving them enjoyment and comfort in this way. And in cases of a highly developed soul, much spiritual help may be given in this way, by means of advice and instruction when the soul on the lower plane is ready for it. All of the planes, in fact, have spiritual helpers. All the planes do. From the very highest planes, some devoted souls preferring to so devote their time in the astral world rather than to take a well-earned rest or to pursue certain studies for their own development. Your guide explains these things to you as you pass backward and forward among the lower set of planes. The reason you do not go higher will be explained to you by and by. And he also informs you that the only exception to the rule of free passage to the planes below the plane of a soul is the one which prevents the lower plane souls from entering the plane of the sleepers, which plane may not be entered by souls who have awakened on a low plane, but may be freely entered by those pure and exalted souls who have attained a high plane. So this should tell you that if you have, if your theological dogma, which you might have or might not have, if you do, if it doesn't get in the way of understanding this, then try to put it aside for a moment. If it fits with your current belief system or theological belief system, then fine. This should tell us not to worry that when our physical body dies and we enter a state of an intermediate state before awakening to our true life in the astral, we go into a great, what's called a soul sleep for a period, or a soul slumber, that we're safe, we're protected. We're not going to be molested in any way. We're safe, and we're guarded, we're watched over, we are protected. The plane of the chamber of slumber is sacred to those occupying it, and those higher souls just mentioned, and is in fact in the nature of a distinct and separated state, rather than those of the series of planes just mentioned. The soul awakens on just the plane for which it is fitted, on just the subplane of that plane which its highest desires and tastes naturally select for it. It is surrounded by congenial minds, and is able to pursue that which the heart of the man or woman has longed for during earthly life. It may make considerable progress during this astral world life, and so when it is reborn, it's able to take a step forward, sometimes a great step forward, when compared to its last incarnation. There are planes and subplanes innumerable, and each finds an opportunity to develop and enjoy to the fullest the highest things of which it is capable at that particular period of development. And as we have said, it may perfect itself and develop so that it would be born under much more favorable conditions and circumstances in the next earth life. But alas, even in this higher world, all do not live up to their best. All do not live up to their best, and instead of making the best of their opportunities and growing spiritually, some allow their more material nature to draw them downward. And they spend much of their time on planes beneath them, not to help and assist, but to live the less spiritual life of the denizens of the lower planes, the more material planes. In such cases, the soul does not get to the benefit of the astral world sojourn, and is born back into just about the same condition as its last earth life. It's sent back to learn its lesson over again. The very lowest planes of the astral world are filled with souls of a gross type, undeveloped and animal-like, in fact, who live as near as possible the lives they lived on earth, but the only thing they gain being the possibility of their living out their gross tastes and becoming sick and tired of it all, at best, and thus allowing to develop a longing for higher things which will manifest in a better chance when they are reborn. These undeveloped souls cannot, of course, visit the upper planes, and the only plane below them being the plane of shells, and the astral subplane immediately above the material plane, which is one of the so-called anterooms of the astral world, they often flock back as near to Earth as possible. They're able to get so near back to Earth that they may become conscious of much that is transpiring there, particularly when the conditions are such that they are in harmony with their own natures. They may be said to be able to practically live on the low material plane, except that they're separated from it by a tantalizing thin veil, which prevents them from actively participating in it except in rare occasions. They may see but not join in the earth life. They hang around the scenes of their old degrading lives and often take possession of the brain of one of their own kind. Who may be under the influence of liquor and thus add to his own low desires. This is an unpleasant subject, and we don't care to dwell on it. Happily, it does not concern those who read these lessons, as they've passed beyond this stage of development. Such low souls are so attracted by earth life on its lower planes that their keen desires cause them to speedily reincarnate in similar conditions, although there is always at least a slight improvement, not a going backward. But I'm going to add, if you have familiarized yourself with certain of my other videos already posted here, you will know that in rare cases there is a going backward, and you'll know where it leads. A soul may make several attempts to advance in spite of the dragging back tendencies of its lower nature, but it never slips back quite as far as the place from which it started. Speaking of slipping all the way to self-destruction, total self-destruction, is an unpleasant subject, because as soon as it's brought up, one wants to know, well, how does that work? And the journey in that direction becomes extremely unpleasant to talk about. And there are more important things to talk about. The souls in the higher planes, having far less attraction for earth life and having such excellent opportunities for advancement, naturally spend a much longer time in the astral world, the general rule being that the higher the plane, the longer the rest and sojourn. But sooner or later the lesson is fully learned, and The soul yearns for that further advancement that can only come from the experience and action of another earth life. And through the force of its desires, never against its will, remember, the soul is gradually caught in the current sweeping it on toward rebirth. And becoming drowsy is helped toward the plane of the room of slumber. And then falling into the soul slumber, it gradually dies to the astral world and is reborn into a new earth life in accordance to its desires and tastes, and for which it is fit at that particular stage of its development. Now, it does not fully awaken upon physical birth, but exists in a dreaming state of gradual awakening during the years of early childhood. Its awakening being evidenced by the gradual dawning of intelligence in the child whose brain keeps pace with the demands made on it. We will go more into detail regarding this matter in succeeding chapters. All of these things your guide has pointed out to you, and he has shown you examples of all the things we've just mentioned. You can see them. You have met and talked with friends and loved ones who have passed out of the body and occupy some of the planes through which you have passed, in fact. You have noticed with wonder that these souls acted and spoke as if their life was the only natural one, and in fact seemed to think that you had come to them from some outside world. You also noticed that while those on each plane were more or less acquainted with the planes beneath them, they often seem in total ignorance of those above them, except in the case of those on the higher planes who had awakened to a conscious realization of what it all meant, and knew that they were merely in a class working their way upward. Those on the lower planes seemed more or less unconscious of the real meaning of their existence, not having awakened to the conscious spiritual stage. You also noticed how few changes these souls seem to have undergone, how very little more they seemed to know about things spiritual and occult than when on earth. You also noticed on the lower planes an old friend who in earth life was a pronounced materialist, who didn't seem to realize that he was dead, and who believed that by some catastrophe of nature he had been transported to some other planet or physical world, and who was as keen as ever for his argument that death ends all, and who flew into a rage with the visitors from the higher spheres who told him whom they were and from whence they came, calling them rogues and impostors, and demanding that they show him something of their claimed higher spheres if they were realities anyway. He claimed that their sudden appearances and disappearances were simply the physical phenomena of a new planet upon which they were now living. Passing away from him in the midst of his railing at you for agreeing with these impostors and visionaries, who, to use his expression, were little better than the spiritualists of the old world, you sadly asked your guide to take you to the higher spheres. Your guide smiled and said, "I'll take you as far as you can go," and then took you to a plane which so fitted in with your desires, aspirations, tastes, and development that you begged him to allow you to remain there, instead of taking you back to earth, as you felt that you had reached the seventh heaven of the astral world. He insisted upon your return, but before starting, told you that you were still in one of the subplanes of the comparatively lower planes. You seemed to doubt his words, and like the materialist, asked to be shown the greater things. He replied, no. You have progressed as far as your limitations will allow. You already have. Right now, you've done. You have reached that part of the other life which will be yours when you part with the body. Unless you manage to develop still more and thus pass into a higher grade. Thus far, you may go, but no further. You have your limitations, just as I have mine. Still farther on, no soul may travel beyond its spiritual boundaries. But, continued your guide, beyond your plane and beyond mine are plane after plane, connected with our earth, the splendors of which man cannot conceive. And there are likewise many planes around the other planets of our chain. And there are millions of other worlds. And there are chains of universes, just as there are chains of planets, and then greater groups of these chains, and so on, greater and grander, beyond the power of man to imagine. And on and on and on and on, higher and higher to inconceivable heights. An infinity of infinities of worlds are before us. Our world and our planetary chain and our system of suns and our system of solar systems are but as grains of sand on the beach. Well, then what am I, poor mortal thing, lost among all this inconceivable greatness, you cried. Well, you are the most precious thing. A living soul, replied your guide, and if you were but destroyed, the whole system of universes would crumble. For you are as necessary as the greatest part of it. It cannot do without you. You cannot be lost or destroyed. You are part of it all, and you are eternal. I'm going to add here that very unpleasant topic of the rare case in which the very soul or potential for the development of one is given up, lost. It never really develops into such a thing that can be eternal. These are the lowest of the low people. Who never move forward and eventually end in total annihilation because there's nothing to move forward. They outlive the lowest desires that there are, and they had no others. And so what they are constituted of, all their constituent parts at all levels that they have, which are few, go back to their original elements. So really nothing that had any there was nothing there to be eternal in the first place, really. So nothing is lost. There is nothing that's being destroyed. There are just some basic components that had been together, and now they just disintegrate to their original parts. There was nothing permanent there that got destroyed. I don't know if I'm making that very clear. It is explained elsewhere and has already been addressed in videos, I believe in the arcane teaching. Right? But that's an unpleasant topic, and it's usually skipped over in such descriptions as these because it's a rare thing, and it doesn't apply to most people who are reading or listening to such information. It wouldn't apply. They would not even be interested in this. They wouldn't have been attracted to it. It wouldn't have come to them, whatever. And all of this, which you have told me, you cried, what is there beyond all of this? What is the center of it all? Your guide's face takes on a rapt expression now. The absolute, he replies, the absolute. You can learn about that in the arcane teachings. And when you reached your physical body again, just before your guide faded away, you asked him, how many million miles away from Earth have we been? And how long were we gone? And he replied, well, you never left the Earth at all. And your body was left alone for just a moment of time. Time and space. They don't belong to the astral world. In these lessons, we've not attempted to force upon you any conception of the truth which does not appeal to you, or which doesn't harmonize with your own conception. I hope that applies here in the presenting of this video too. We grant to all the liberty of their own convictions, preferring that you should accept only such of the teachings as may appeal to you, letting the rest pass by and not being needed just now. We merely state this conception of the matter as simply and plainly as we are able, so that you may understand the theory involved. Whether or not it appeals to you as truth is a matter with which, frankly, we have no concern. If it is true, then it is true, no matter what you may think of it. And your belief or unbelief doesn't change that. But the yogis and Oriental occultists, as well as the Western ones too, do not hold to the idea that anyone is to be punished for unbelief, nor is one to be rewarded for belief, for that matter. They hold that belief and unbelief are not matters of the will, but of the growth of understanding. Therefore, it is not consistent with justice to suppose that one is rewarded or punished for belief or unbelief. The yogis are the most tolerant of people. They see truth, they see good and truth in all forms of belief and conceptions of truth, and never blame anyone for not agreeing with them. They have no set creeds. They don't ask their followers to accept as a matter of course all that they teach. Their advice to students is take what appeals to you and leave the rest. Tomorrow come back and take some of what you have rejected today, and so on, until you receive all that we give you. Don't force yourself to accept unpalatable truths, for when the time comes for you to receive them, they will be pleasant to your mental taste. Take what you please and leave what you please. Our idea of hospitality does not consist in forcing unpalatable things upon you, insisting that you must eat them to gain our favor, or that you will be punished for not liking them. Take your own wherever you find it, but take nothing that is not yours by right of understanding, and fear not that anything that belongs to you may be withheld. With this understanding, we proceed with our lesson, a most important lesson. When the ego, with a capital E here, the true self, the I, that part that's not changing as bodies are discarded, when it leaves the body at the moment of which we call death, it leaves behind it the lower principles and passes onward to states which will be considered by us presently. It leaves behind first the physical body. This physical body, as we've told you earlier, is composed of millions of tiny cells, little lives having a bit of mind or intelligence, under control of the central mind of the man, having also a supply of prana or vital force, and a material casing or body, the sum of which little bodies makes up the whole body of the man, the whole organism. Now, we have devoted a chapter of our book called Hatha Yoga to the consideration of these little lives. And by the way, that book, Hatha Yoga, is the one from which I quote in my video called Food, Nourishment, and Vital Force, although I do not read the part that's being referred to here. We must refer to the student to that book for fuller particulars of their life and work of the cells. When the death of the man occurs, when the ego leaves its material sheath, which it is used for the period of that particular so-called life, the cells separate and scatter, and that which we call decay sets in. So the integration is now disintegrating. The force which held these cells together is withdrawn, and they're free to go their own way and form new combinations. Some are absorbed into the bodies of plants in the vicinity, and eventually find themselves forming parts of the body of some animal which has eaten the plant, or a part of some other man who has eaten the plant, or the meat of the animal which had eaten the plant. You will, of course, understand that these little cell lives have nothing to do with the real soul or the ego of the man. And again, I'm not talking about the false ego. They are but his late servants, and have no connection with his consciousness. Others of these atoms remain in the ground for some time, until taken up by some other form of living thing which needs nourishment. As a leading writer has said, death is but an aspect of life, and the destruction of one material form is but a prelude to the building up of another. From the moment that the ego leaves the physical body and the influence of the commanding mind is withdrawn from the cells and the cell groups, disorder reigns among them. They become a disorganized army, rushing hither and thither, interfering with each other, jostling and pushing each other, even fighting each other. Their only object being to get away from the crowd, to escape from the general confusion. During the life of the body, their main object is to work together in harmony, under the orders of their officers. After the death of the body, their only object seems to separate and each go its own way. First, the groups separate from one another, and then each group breaks up into smaller groups, and so on until each individual cell becomes freed from its fellows and goes its own way, or what is called by some form of life needing it. As a writer on the subject has said, the body is never more alive than when it's dead. But it is alive in its units and dead in its totality. When the ego departs from the physical body at the moment of death, the prana, being no longer under control of the central mind, responds only to the orders of the individual atoms or their groups then. You see? Which have formed the individual body. And as the physical body disintegrates and is resolved into its original elements, each atom takes with it sufficient prana to maintain its vitality and to enable it to form new combinations, the unused prana returning to the great universal storehouse from which it came. Now, when the ego leaves the body at the moment of death, it carries with it the astral body as well as the higher principles. This astral body, you will remember, is the exact counterpart of the physical one, but is composed of finer quality of matter and is invisible to the ordinary vision, but may be seen plainly by the clairvoyant or astral sight, and may therefore be sometimes seen by persons under certain psychic conditions. Clairvoyants describe the parting of the astral body from the physical body as most interesting. They describe it as rising from the physical body like a cloud of thin luminous vapor, but being connected with the physical body by a slender silken vapory cord, which cord becomes thinner and thinner until it becomes invisible to even the fine clairvoyant vision just before it breaks entirely. The astral body exists sometime after the physical death of the man, and under certain circumstances it becomes visible to living persons and is then called a ghost. The astral body of a dying person is sometimes projected by an earnest desire and may become visible to relatives or friends with whom the dead man is in sympathy. After a time, differing in various cases, as will be seen later on, the astral body is discarded by the ego and it in turn begins to disintegrate. The discarded astral body is nothing more than a corpse of finer material, and is what occultists know as an astral shell. It has no life or intelligence when thus discarded, and it floats around in the lower astral atmosphere until it is resolved into its original elements. It seems to have a peculiar attraction toward its late physical counterpart, and will often return to the neighborhood of the physical body and disintegrate with it. Persons of psychic sight, either normal or influenced by fear or similar emotions, frequently see these astral shells floating around graveyards, over battlefields, and so forth. They're often mistaken for the spirits of the departed people, whereas they are no more the person than is the physical corpse beneath the ground. These astral shells can actually be galvanized into a semblance of life by coming into contact with the vitality of some medium or whatever. The prana of the latter animating it, and the subconscious mentality of this medium, channel, or whatever, causing it to manifest signs of life and partial intelligence. At some of the seances of the mediums, these astral shells or other forms of circles, these astral shells are materialized by means of the vitality of the people involved and talk in a stupid, disconnected way with those around. But it is not the person himself talking. It's just a mere shell animated by the life principle of the people in the circle. And acting and taking on, talking like an automaton. There are, of course, other forms of spirit return, which are far different. But those investigating spiritualistic phenomena should be aware of confounding these astral shells with the real intelligence of their deceased friends. Now let's return to the ego, which has left the physical body. While the ego, encased in his astral body, is slowly passing out of the physical, the whole life of the person from infancy to old age passes before his mental vision. Now you've heard about this life passes before your eyes thing. That's what's being referred to here. The memory gives up its secrets. And picture after picture passes in swift succession before the mind, and many things are made plain to the departing soul. The reason of many things is discovered, and the soul sees what it all means. That is, it understands its whole life just complete, because it sees it as a whole. This is in the nature of a vivid dream to the dying individual, but it leaves a deep impression, and the memories are recalled and made use of at a later period by the soul. Occultists have always urged that the friends and relatives of a dying person should maintain quiet and calm around him, that it may not be disturbed by conflicting emotions or distracting sounds. The soul should be allowed to go on its way in peace and quiet, without being held back by the wishes or conversation of those around him. So the ego passes on and out from the body. To where? Well, let's say here that the future states of the soul between incarnations have nothing to do with places. It's a matter of states, not places. There are numerous places of existence, and all interpenetrate each other, so that a given space may contain intelligences living on several different planes, those living on the lower planes not being conscious of the existence and presence of those living on higher ones. So get the idea of place out of your mind. It's a matter of states or planes. The soul, after passing out of the body, is, if left undisturbed by emphatic calls from those whom it has left behind, and which calls may consist of violent manifestations of grief, and earnest demands for the return of the departed one on the part of some loved one, or from someone to whom the deceased person was bound by ties of duty, falls into a semi-conscious state. A blissful, peaceful, happy, restful state, a dream of the soul. This state continues for some time, varying in individuals as we shall see, until the astral shell falls from it and floats off in the astral atmosphere, and until the lower portions of that etherealized matter, which confines the lower portions of the mind, gradually dissolves and also drops from the soul, leaving it possessed of only the higher portions of its mentality. A man of low spiritual development, and consequently of a larger degree of animal nature, will part with but little of his mind body, his mental body, and soon reaches the highest of which he has been mentally and spiritually capable in his earth life. The man of high spiritual attainment will gradually shed, so to speak, much of his mental body until he has thrown off all except the highest portions developed in his earth life. Now, those between the two mentioned types will act according to their degree of spiritual attainment, of course. Then, when the last possible remnant of the lower mentality is dropped from the soul, it awakes, as it passes on to states which will be described a little later on in this lesson. According according to the yogi philosophy and Oriental occultism. It'll be seen that the man of gross mentality and spiritual development will stay in the dreamlike state but a short time, as the process of casting off seeds is a comparatively simple one, requiring little time. Excuse me. And it likewise will be seen that the man who has reached a high degree of spiritual development will rest for a longer period, as he has much more to get rid of. And this discarded material of the mind drops from him like the leaves of a rose, one after the other, from the outer to the inner. Each soul awakens when it has discarded all that it can, or rather, all that will drop from it, and when it has reached that highest state possible to it. Now, those who have made natural spiritual progress during the earth life just past will have much useless and outgrown matter to discard, while the one who has neglected his opportunities and dies just about the same as he was born will have very little to throw off and will awaken in a very short time. Each rests until the highest part of unfoldment has manifested itself. But before going on further, let's stop a moment to say that both the sinking into the restful state and the soundness and continuance of it may be interfered with by those left in earth life. And it can be interfered with. Now, this doesn't mean an invasion in the astral plane by some astral entity. No. Under protection, remember? Under protection during this slumber. But that slumber can be interfered with by those still on the material plane, the physical plane. A soul which has something on its mind to communicate, or which is grieved by the pain of those who have been left behind, especially if it hears the lamentations and constant call for its return, will fight off the dreamy state creeping over it, and it will make desperate efforts to return. And likewise, the mental calls of those who have been left behind will disturb the slumber. And it has once, when it has been once entered into. As I was just saying. And this will cause the sleeping soul to rouse itself and endeavor to answer the calls. Or at least will partially awaken it and retard its unfoldment. Our selfish grief and demands often cause our loved ones who have passed much pain and sorrow and unrest, unless they have learned the true state of affairs before they've passed out and refuse to be called back to earth even by those whom they love. Cases are known to occultists where souls have fought off the slumber for years in order to be around their loved ones on earth. But this course was unwise, as it caused unnecessary sorrow and pain to both the one who had passed on and those who remained on earth. We should avoid delaying the process of those who have passed on. Let them sleep on and rest, awaiting the hour of their transformation. It is like making them die after death several times in succession. Those who truly love and understand avoid this. Their love and understanding bids them let the soul depart in peace and to take its well-earned rest and gain its full development. This period of soul slumber is like the existence of the babe in its mother's womb. It sleeps, and it may awaken into life and strength. Before passing on to the awakening, however, we think it proper to state that it is only the soul of the person who has died a natural death which sinks at once, if not disturbed, into the soul slumber. Those who die by accident, so to speak, or who are killed, in other words, those who pass out of the body suddenly, find themselves wide awake and in full possession of the mental faculties for some time. They often are not aware that they have died and cannot understand what's the matter with them. They are often fully conscious for a short time of life on earth and can see and hear all that's going on around them by means of their astral faculties. They can't imagine that they have passed out of the body, and they are sorely perplexed. Their lot would be most unhappy for a few days until the sleep overtook them, were it not for certain astral helpers, who are souls from the higher states of existence, who gather around them and gently break to them the news of their real condition. Offer them words of comfort and advice, and, so to speak, take care of them until they sink into the soul slumber, just as a tired child sinks to sleep at night. These helpers never fail in their duty. And no one who passes out suddenly is neglected, be he or she good or bad, so to speak. For these helpers know that all are children and are their own brothers and sisters. Men of high spiritual development and powers have been known to pass out of their physical bodies temporarily by means of their astral bodies for the purpose of giving aid and advice in times of great catastrophes, or after a great battle, when immediate assistance and advice are needed. At such times also, some of the higher intelligences in the scale of spiritual evolution descend from their lofty states, and appearing as men, give words of encouragement and the benefit of their wisdom. This not only in civilized countries, but in all the parts of the world, for all are akin. Many who have reached the high stages of spiritual development, and who have advanced far beyond the rest of the particular sub-race to which they belong, and who have earned a longer stay in the higher states, awaiting the progress of their brothers, devote themselves to this and similar tasks, voluntarily relinquishing their earned rest and happiness for the good of their less fortunate brethren. Persons dying in the way of which we have spoken, of course, gradually do fall into the slumber of the soul, and the process of casting off the confining sheaths goes on just as in cases of those dying in more what we would call a natural death. And when the soul has cast off the confining sheaths and has reached the state for which it is prepared by its earth lives, including that gained by development in the last earth life, it passes immediately to the plane in the astral world for which it's fitted, and to which it is drawn by the law of attraction. That makes all this hoopla and marketing about the selling of material, about the law of attraction these days. Makes a lot of that just seem a little trite, doesn't it? Now, the astral world in all of its stages and planes is not a place, but it's a state, as we have stated. These planes interpenetrate, and those dwelling on one plane are not conscious of those dwelling on another, nor can they pass from one plane to another, with this exception. Those dwelling on a higher plane are able to see, if they desire, the planes below them in the order of development, and may also visit the lower planes if they desire to do so. But those on the lower planes aren't able to either see or visit the higher planes, as we've already stated. This is not because there is a watchman at the gate, so to speak, or anything of that sort. There can be no gate with respect to a plane or a state. But It's from the same reason that a fish isn't able to soar above the water into the air like a bird. Its nature doesn't permit it to do so. A soul having another soul toward which it is attached by some old tie, and finding that soul in a lower plane than itself, is able to visit the less developed soul and aid it in its development by advice and instruction, and thus to prepare it for its next incarnation, so that when the two shall meet again in earth life, the less developed soul will have grown far nearer to its higher brother or sister soul, and may therefore thereafter go hand in hand throughout life or lives. Now remember, that said brother or sister soul, like soul brother, soul sister. This is the real meaning of the word soul brother or soul sister. And note again, it doesn't say soul mate. That's a different thing. This is much what we're talking about here. Soul, sister soul, brother soul. More like soul friend. That's what it is. Not soul mate. That's a different thing. Now this, of course, providing the less developed soul is willing to be instructed. Souls, after reaching a certain degree of development, are quite willing to be instructed when out of the body, as above stated, as they are freed from the distracting influences of earth life and are more open to help. The yogi teaching goes so far as to state that in rare cases, the helping soul may even bring his lower brother to such a state that he is enabled to throw off some of his lower mental principles which have clung to him after his awakening, and which kept him in a certain plane, and thus enabled him to pass on to the next higher plane. But this is rare and can only happen when the soul has been nearly but not quite able to throw off the confining sheath unaided. The lower planes of the astral world are filled with souls of a gross, undeveloped type, who live lives very similar to those lived on earth. In fact, they are so closely connected with the material plane and are so attracted to it that they are so conscious of much of that goes on in it that they may be said to be living on the material plane and only prevented from active participation in it by a thin veil which separates them from their own kind in the body. These souls hang around the old scenes of their earthly degradation, and they often influence one of their kind who is under the influence of liquor or other substances, and who is thereby open to influences of this nature. They live their old lives over again in this way, and add to the brutality and the degradation of the living by their influences and their association. There are quite a number of these lower planes, as well as the higher planes, each containing disembodied souls of the particular class belonging to it. These lower plane souls are in very close contact with the material plane, and are consequently the ones often attracted to seances and similar scenes, rituals, where the medium and the sitters and whoever else, depending on the exact nature of the scene, are on a low plane. Now think of this in connection with the connections that I'm trying to encourage people to make as I'm presenting all this material here of this nature on my channel in YouTube. You know, the people in control of this planet and their activities, and their astral connections, right? The line of influence traced back to where it goes, as far as it goes, into this plane that we're talking about here. Deliberate connection with it. And add in that this connection is being intentionally engaged in, knowingly engaged in intelligently engaged in by people who are psychopathic. Think of the implications. Think of the real nature of stuff going on here in the world. Think in terms of war on consciousness. If you have the feeling that there is a really added dimensions to world activity here, you're right. I want you to make those connections and broaden your understanding in these directions. Toward the goal of knowing what to do about this. How to raise above this level of vibration where we're influenced by all of this stuff. And dragged into it. Unknowingly. Or even willingly. With knowledge comes the potential for power. There are quite a number of these lower planes, as well as higher planes, each containing disembodied souls of the particular class belonging to it. And these lower plane souls are in very close contact with the material plane, and are consequently the ones often attracted to some of these scenes on the lower plane, right? Where there is intentional contact being made. They masquerade as spirits and others. Spirits of friends or whoever, often claiming to be some well-known and celebrated personages, in fact. They play the silly pranks that they would be likely to play. And they take a particular delight in doing this, and the general devilment of it all, if permitted to do so, they're not fit company for people on the higher plane, whether they be embodied or disembodied. And these lower plane souls spend but little time in the disembodied state and are strongly attracted by the material life, the consequence being that they are filled with a great desire to reincarnate, and they generally spend little time between two incarnations. Of course, when they're reborn, they are attracted to and attracted by parents of the same tendencies, so that the surroundings in their new earth life will correspond very closely to those of their old one. These crude and undeveloped souls, as well as the souls of the savage races, progress but slowly, making but a trifling advance in each life, and having to undergo repeated and frequent incarnations in order to make even a little bit of progress. Their souls are strong for the material, and they are attracted to it and by it. The spirit's influence is exerting but comparatively slight attraction upon them. But even these make some progress. Again, I'm going to add, with rare exceptions. All, except with rare exceptions, are moving forward even just a little. Even if but a little. The souls on each of the succeeding higher planes, of course, make more rapid progress each earth life, and have fewer incarnations and a much longer time between them. Their inclinations and tastes being of a higher order, they prefer to dwell on these higher planes of disembodied life, thinking of and contemplating the higher teachings, aided as they are by the absence from material things and encouraged by the rays of the spiritual mind beating down upon them, helping their unfoldment. They are able to prepare themselves for great progress this way, and often spend centuries on the higher planes before reincarnating. In some cases where they have been advanced far beyond their race, they spend thousands of years in the higher planes, waiting until the race grows up to render their rebirth attractive. And in the meantime, they find much helpful work to do for less developed souls. But sooner or later, the souls feel a desire to gain new experiences and to manifest in earth life some of the advancement which has come to them since death, so to speak, And for these reasons, and from the attraction of desires which have been smoldering there, not lived out or yet cast off, or possibly influenced by the fact that some loved soul on a lower plane is about ready to incarnate, and wishing to be incarnated at the same time in order to be with it, which is also a desire having to do with earth, material plane, the souls fall into the current, sweeping toward rebirth, and the selection of proper parents, and advantageous circumstances and surroundings, and in consequence again fall into a soul slumber gradually, and so when their time comes, they die to the plane upon which they've been existing and are born into a new physical life and body. A soul does not fully awaken from its sleep immediately at birth, but exists in a dreamlike state during the days of infancy, its gradual awakening being evidenced by the growing intelligence of the babe, the brain of the child keeping pace with the demands made upon it. In some cases, the awakening is premature, as we see in the case of child prodigies, child genius, and so forth. But such cases are more or less abnormal and unhealthy. Occasionally, the dreaming soul in the child half awakes and startles us by some profound observation or mature remark or conduct. Much of the process of preparing for reincarnation is performed by the soul unconsciously, in obedience to its inspirations and desires, as it really has not grown to understand what it all means and what is before it, and is being swept along by the law of attraction almost unconsciously. But after souls attain a certain degree of development, they become conscious of the process of reincarnation, and are thereafter conscious of past lives, and preceding a rebirth may take conscious part in selecting the environments and surroundings. The higher they rise in the scale, the greater their conscious power and choice. It will readily be seen that there are planes upon planes of disembodied existence. The yogi philosophy teaches that there are 7 great planes. There we are, the 7 great planes. Sometimes spoken of by uneducated Hindus as the 7 heavens. But each great plane has 7 subdivisions, and each subdivision has 7 minor subdivisions, and so on. Well, earlier here in this video, I said that in this book he wasn't referring to 7 planes. And at first, it doesn't seem that he is, at the early parts of the book. I mean, he certainly does not say anything about a plane of forces. But here in the end, he is clarifying the opening ambiguity, or apparent ambiguity. It is impossible for us to begin to describe the nature of the higher astral life. Now here, this higher astral life, whenever William Walker Atkinson says it's impossible to describe the higher planes, he's not talking about what in other places he's referring to as the astral plane. So they're like I said earlier, there are different ways to talk about this when it comes to classifying the planes, numbering them, grouping them together, or where one cuts off and the next begins. We have no words to describe it and no minds to comprehend it. So life on the lower planes is very similar to Earth life. Many of the inhabitants seeming to think that it is part of the Earth and not realizing that they are actually freed from earthly limitations. Imagine that fire can burn them, water can drown them, and so forth. They live practically on the Earth amidst its scenes. But above these are planes whose inhabitants have higher ideas and lives, as can be seen in the series that I've already put here on YouTube, The Astral World. More of it is described. Some of the higher activities are described. Above these are planes whose inhabitants have higher ideas and lives, and so on and on and on and on, until the bliss of the higher planes cannot be comprehended by man today. In some of the intermediate planes, those who are fond of music indulge to the utmost their love for it, artists their love for their art. This is the more the kind of thing described in the Astral World in greater detail. The book, The Astral World, already posted here on YouTube. Intellectual workers pursue their studies and so on along these lines. Above these are those who have awakened spiritually and have opportunities for developing themselves and gaining knowledge. And above these are states which we cannot dream. about, of which we cannot dream. And yet, remember this, even these highest planes are but parts of the higher astral plane, which plane is but one of the lower planes of the universe. And above that plane of the after plane of existence. But why speak of this? We can't undertake to master the problem of higher mathematics when we scarcely know how to add two figures together. But all this is for us, all for us, and we cannot be robbed of that inheritance. Now I'm going to stop this video here and produce another one that addresses the idea of spiritual evolution in connection with all that's been said in this video. But I've been recording now for, we're at 1 hour and 35 minutes, going on 1 hour and 36 minutes. So I'm going to cut this off and then just do kind of like a part 2 from this book. And that'll be called, that'll be a chapter called Spiritual Evolution. I may even add a little more into it, but it'll at least include spiritual evolution in the context of what's been laid out right here in this video up to this moment.